At 78, on a cold Texas morning, Nolan Ryan steps out onto his ranch like an icon who has etched his name into American history. He was once the strikeout machine that made the world bow in awe. 5,714 strikeouts, a record no one comes close to, 7 no-hitters. An achievement experts call impossible. 27 seasons, a number almost supernatural for a pitcher. For 3 decades, the Ryan Express wasn't just a nickname, it was a declaration that speed, will, and Texas pride could redefine an entire sport. He once silenced stadiums with every pitch, made batting geniuses tremble in fear, turned summer nights in California, Houston, or Arlington into sacred moments for millions. Nolan wasn't a flashy star. He was a working man with his hands, his breath, every fiber of muscle, a representative of a tough America that doesn't show off but never surrenders. But behind those records lies a body that paid the price with wounds that never heal. As he places his hand on the barn door latch this morning, the hand that once hurled 100 miles per hour fastballs trembles like a leaf in the cold wind. The knuckles, worn from thousands of innings, stiffen, aching as if clamped in metal rings. His back, once the pillar of his legendary windup, now stabs with pain from just a slight bend to tie his shoes. Every step is a negotiation between past and present, between legend and old age. His heart, which underwent bypass surgery after a near-fatal heart attack, still throbs occasionally as a reminder that no one, not even America's fastest, can beat time. But what earns respect isn't the immortal records, it's how he faces that destruction. Nolan doesn't complain, doesn't surrender, doesn't live off old glory. He still rises before dawn, still walks the ranch fences, still uses those painful hands to stroke the horses' manes, still watches the sunrise with the eyes of a warrior who has never accepted defeat. The pain doesn't weaken him, it only reveals more clearly the will that kept him standing for half a century. And in the silence of that Texas morning, people understand that Nolan Ryan's tragedy isn't the pain, but that he always chooses to keep walking, even when every step is a battle no stadium can see. If you want to continue following the painful yet miraculous journey behind the legend of Nolan Ryan, hit subscribe so you don't miss any part of the story. Thank you for joining, and now we step into part 2, a childhood of sleepless nights and bone-chilling cold in Alvin. That Texas morning was just the opening to a story seeded long ago, from the days when Nolan Ryan was a scrawny kid in the town of Alvin, where the cold seeped through every wooden door crack and poverty clung to every home like a damp fog that never lifts. The Ryan family had 6 siblings, so crowded that the small dinner table always lacked chairs, space, and even moments when parents could pause long enough to look at their youngest and ask a simple question, "Are you okay today?" His father, a tough Texas man through and through, juggled multiple jobs from communications technician to newspaper delivery, while his mother handled everything else. The house wasn't rich, wasn't comfortable, and the love in the home, though real, had to be spread thin across too many kids at once. So Nolan was rarely the center of anything. No one meant harm. It was just that in that family, silence was the only way to survive. And that skinny little boy, unlike his siblings, carried a different energy, quiet, inward, so reserved that many thought he had no need to talk to anyone. But the truth was he just didn't know how to be heard. On winter nights, when the wind battered the tin walls and his parents hadn't returned from their shifts, he would sneak out to the backyard, a patch of dirt mixed with weeds, with an old brick wall his dad had built from leftover materials. That was where Nolan found his own world. He'd pick up the worn rubber ball, stand in front of the wall cold as a gravestone and throw relentlessly, throw until his shoulder burned like fire, his hands went numb, his fingers bled from the ball scraping skin. Each rebound was just the dull thud of rubber on brick, but to Nolan, it was the only sound in the world that answered him. That was the first time Nolan felt something he didn't fully understand yet. Baseball wasn't a game, it was the only language the world would listen to from him. But even that language had to fight a harsher reality. Poverty didn't allow him to sleep enough. His father woke at 3 or 4 in the morning for newspaper routes, a job that exhausted adults, but he still dragged Nolan along because no one in our house has time to watch him. On mornings so cold breath turned to smoke, Nolan's small hands gripped the rusty bike handlebars, wobbling under stacks of papers heavier than his body. For each delivery, he'd jump off, sprint to someone's porch, place the paper just right, then race back before his dad barked, "Hurry up." His body was drained, feet aching, wrists numb from the freeze. But Nolan was never allowed to complain. In that family, complaining meant weakness, and weakness was never an option for a Texas man. It was on those foggy mornings that the boy began carrying a strange inferiority complex. No matter how hard he tried, he felt he was never good enough for someone to stop and say, "You did great." That feeling followed Nolan through childhood. Like Simon Cowell back when he sat forgotten in a classroom corner, Nolan was the same present, but no one really saw him. He had a strange gift, an arm stronger than kids his age, quick reflexes, eyes focused to a frightening degree. But that gift was buried under shyness, lack of confidence, a silence often mistaken for timidity. A child with extraordinary ability who always felt less than smaller, never good enough. So every night, when his siblings were asleep, Nolan would sneak back to that old brick wall and throw again. Throw until his whole arm glowed like hot coals. Throw until his eyes stung from the cold wind. Throw to suppress the invisible grip squeezing his chest. He didn't say it out loud, but every pitch was a silent cry, "See me," and the world, though it didn't know his name yet, began to notice the sound of Nolan's own heart, a lonely, stubborn heart quietly journeying to find its place in a crowded family and a childhood full of shadows. The foggy, cold Texas morning, when 78-year-old Nolan grits his teeth to open the barn door, is the natural continuation of those childhood newspaper mornings, a silent battle where no one praises, no one comforts, but the boy from back then and the old man today still gets up, still keeps walking, still throws into the darkness to find his own light. But the loneliness of his Alvin childhood was just the first soil of a long tragedy. Because when Nolan entered his teenage years, the time when most boys find their voice, his voice was still just quiet breaths lost in the Texas wind. He grew fast, tall and lanky, eyes always looking at the ground, as if facing someone too long would reveal the awkwardness inside. Teachers liked him for being well-behaved, but no one thought he'd amount to much. Friends called Nolan too nice, too quiet, not the type to become any kind of athlete. At Alvin High School, amid hallways buzzing with youthful noise, that boy was still a small shadow slipping past groups, as if no one really saw him. He heard people talk about new sports talents, heard coaches excitedly call names of students they pinned hopes on. But rarely did anyone call Nolan, not because he was weak, but because no one knew what he had beyond his silence. People often say, in the world of the loud, the quiet child is left behind. And Nolan, exactly that, was left behind. Seen as a nice kid, but he won't go far. Even when he started pitching for the school team, that prejudice stuck to him like red Texas clay after rain. Scouts from big teams came to watch games, but when they saw Nolan, they jotted superficial notes. Strong arm, very strong but raw. He throws, but he doesn't know how to pitch. To them, Nolan was a cannon without ammo, a lighter without a flame. Everyone saw the speed, but they didn't believe he had the mind, the game-reading ability, or the discipline to be a real pitcher. And so, like so many times before, Nolan heard adults discuss his future right in front of him, but they talked as if he didn't exist. Like Simon Cowell once standing in the EMI mailroom, making coffee and delivering letters to people who couldn't remember his name, Nolan stood on the field with the ball in hand, but no one really looked him in the eye. They looked at the arm, they looked at the speed, but they didn't look at the person. He threw 90, then 92, then 95 miles per hour, numbers that left his friends slack-jawed, but scouts just shrugged. Wild kid. No control. Does he have the guts for the big leagues? Every word was like a splinter in his mind, so that in every game, Nolan wasn't just throwing to the catcher's mitt, he was throwing at the doubting stares choking him. But the pain of his teenage years didn't just come from being dismissed. It also came from life's cruel interruptions. When Nolan started showing signs of breaking through, when his arm was strong enough to buzz the local baseball community, America entered an era where every young man had to register for the military reserves. Nolan did too. Baseball practices were replaced by military drills. Pitches gave way to long runs, barked orders, cold nights in barracks. His development, already fragile, was snapped without mercy, and when he returned to the field after each reserve stint, he had to start over from scratch. The once powerful arm was slower, muscles sore, breathing ragged. Friends progressed, scouts found new prospects, while Nolan wrestled with his own body, as if life kept reminding him, "You're not allowed to move as fast as others." But no matter how tired, how hurt, how constantly undervalued, Nolan didn't collapse. Instead, he threw more. Every night after reserve duty, after odd jobs to help his parents, Nolan stood before that old brick wall again, and threw until his arm went numb. He threw into the dark like throwing at the mockery, at the doubting eyes, at the never good enough feeling that had haunted him since childhood. He stayed silent, stayed lonely, but the power in that arm didn't just come from muscle, it came from pain no one knew, from the will to prove that the forgotten kid from Alvin would one day make the whole world turn and look. And it was in that silence, the silence of a boy on the field, no one thought would succeed, that a legend began to form. Not loud, no fireworks, just the sound of the ball smacking the mitt in the night, and a silent vow, "I will become someone, even if the whole world doesn't believe it." When Nolan Ryan was traded to the California Angels, it wasn't just a new opportunity, it was the pivotal turn that transformed the overlooked kid from Alvin into a name America had to whisper. In Anaheim, where palm trees swayed in the wind and stadium noise roared like thunder, Nolan entered a completely different chapter. No longer the shy kid dismissed by scouts, no longer the reservist forced to shelve his dreams. With the Angels, Nolan became something grander, more terrifying, almost supernatural. In just a few years, his velocity surpassed every standard of the era. People stopped measuring Nolan's fastball in Manpine, they measured it in terror. 98, 99, then touching 100. Every pitch was like a blade slicing the air, like thunder in a clear sky, like a declaration that the human body could be pushed to limits science hadn't caught up to. And then the no-hitters started appearing like chapters in a myth. 3, 4, then 5. Every time Nolan left the mound, Angels fans leaped to their feet, clapping until their palms stung. All of America had to jolt and ask each other, where did this man come from? In that moment, Nolan became the symbol of pure power, a man who could single-handedly control a game, leave spectators breathless with just his right arm. But just as America started calling him a legend, his body began to betray him, and that betrayal came like a cold knife from behind, quiet, unannounced, but ruthless enough that he couldn't ignore it. His right shoulder, the source of 5,714 strikeouts, started burning after every game. Not ordinary pain. It was a hot agony like fire racing through tendons. Every time Nolan rotated for his windup, his shoulder felt like it would dislocate. His elbow, the critical hinge for every throw, swelled after each inning, sometimes so bad he couldn't straighten it. Doctors told him they'd never seen anyone throw so much that their body was flattened, like metal heated and bent over and over. But the fans didn't know. America didn't know. Angels Stadium only saw a man standing firm like a bronze statue, pitching inning after inning without a hint of weakness. But every time he stepped into the clubhouse, the truth emerged. Nolan submerged in ice, face twisted in pain, fighting to keep groans from escaping his throat. On practice days, he took the field with his shoulder wrapped in tape, his right arm so numb, he sometimes couldn't feel if his fingers were gripping the ball. A normal body would stop. But Nolan didn't. He kept throwing. And that's what split the media in two, half worshipped him as superhuman, half criticized him as reckless, undisciplined. He's too strong for his own good. He's wild. He throws fire but doesn't control it. Those words, those sneers, hammered down on his spirit like blows from the sky. People didn't understand that velocity wasn't innate. It was the result of childhood loneliness. Nights throwing at the brick wall, mornings delivering papers with purple cold hands. The media only saw the man throwing 100 miles per hour. They didn't see the cost, and the cost kept rising. Nolan entered his 20s with pain that men twice his age struggled with. Every night he tossed and turned as his elbow felt like it was being sliced. Sometimes it took 40 minutes just to warm up his shoulder for the first pitch. There were games where he threw into the 8th inning feeling like his entire right arm was paralyzed, but he still refused to leave the mound, not out of pride, but because he believed his duty was to stand there, under all the lights, through the stabbing pain, to prove that the silent kid from Alvin could become a man America respected. That pain followed him year after year, season after season, on long bus rides and flights, from California to Texas, from 20 to 30, then 40, then 50, and finally, all the way to 78. Because Nolan's body never truly recovered, it just got used to the pain. Every blistering pitch that threatened to tear tendons, every 130, 150 pitch game, every year without rest were invisible scars, cutting into him even now. When he stands up each morning, his right shoulder still makes a small crack, the sound of old sacrifices never healed. But a true hero isn't someone without wounds. A hero is someone who carries those wounds through life, and that was Nolan Ryan with the Angels, a legend blazing under the lights, but also a young man starting to pay with his own body. People cheered for strikeouts, for no-hitters, for 100 miles per hour fastballs, but only he knew that every time the ball shot through the air like a bullet, his body cracked a little more, a crack that would follow him not just that year, but for life. And that was the Angels' tragedy, where glory began, and where pain clung to him until the end. The glory with the Angels made Nolan an American icon, but it also opened another tragedy, quieter without lights or cheers, the tragedy of a family torn apart by his very greatness. While Nolan crisscrossed stadiums, while his fastballs aired on national TV, in a completely different corner of life, Ruth, the woman tied to him since he was 18, was silently carrying everything the world never saw. 3 kids grew up almost without their father's presence on important days. Ruth drove them to school in rushed mornings, showed up alone to parent-teacher meetings, recitals, midnight fevers, times her son got bullied, or her daughter cried over first heartbreaks. All 3 kids at some point asked, "Where's Dad, Mom?" And Ruth, heart-twisting, could only say, "Dad's doing what he has to do." Because everyone in the family knew, Nolan wasn't abandoning them, he just couldn't be there. Schedules, travel, practice, team meetings, swallowed his life like a storm that never stopped. Meanwhile, Ruth stayed in the Texas house, cleaning, cooking, laundry, fixing faucets, changing bulbs, paying tuition, managing emotions, holding together every tiny piece of a family the outside world glamorously called the Ryan family. They didn't know Ruth sometimes drove hours to the hospital, hiding sighs behind the wheel. No one knew there were nights she sat alone in the kitchen, hands still holding unwashed dishes, staring at the clock at 1 a.m., knowing Nolan was still on a plane, or lying in a hotel bed with a swollen elbow throbbing in pain. And those years stretched like endless waiting. Ruth understood baseball was Nolan's breath, but understanding didn't mean it didn't hurt. There were kids' birthdays where the father's chair stayed empty, graduations where crowds roared applause, but the Ryan kids didn't hear it from the most important person. Daughter's performances, a song, a storytelling act that Nolan only saw on grainy VHS tapes, and the weakest moments of his son asking his mom, "Does Dad love me? He's never here." Those questions hurt more than any tendon-tearing pitch, more than the tensest game of his life. But Nolan never spoke of it. He was never good with words, never knew how to express the love inside him. He only knew how to throw, and pay with absence. It wasn't until later in life, in a quiet afternoon sitting beside his best friend on the porch, that Nolan said what he'd never admitted. His voice dropped as if every word was dragged through a painful chest. "I owe Ruth a life I can't repay." That wasn't the apology of a guilty man. It was the honest confession of someone torn lifelong between dreams and family, between the obsession to succeed and regrets he couldn't fix. Nolan's tragedy wasn't scandal or mistake. His tragedy was decades of silence, the silence of a husband caught between stadium glory and empty family dinners. Ruth never blamed him. She never left, never resented the life that gave her husband too great a talent, never demanded repayment. She just quietly kept standing behind him, like a shadow that never fades. The world revered Nolan as an American hero, but few realized a woman had sacrificed her youth, her life, to keep the home standing while that hero conquered the world. And that shadow, Ruth's gentle but unbreakable shadow, was the most beautiful, painful, and truest tragedy in Nolan Ryan's life. People say every legend pays a price, but what few understand is the one who pays the most isn't always the legend. It's the one who stood behind, silently enduring everything. And in Nolan's story, that person was always Ruth. When the Angels chapter closed, Nolan Ryan didn't choose glamour or the most famous team. He chose to return to Texas, the land that raised him, shaped him, and would test him to the limit. The Houston Astros welcomed the Lone Star son like a hero returning from war, but what no one understood was that the pressure of home could be heavier than any from distant crowds. Texans didn't just want Nolan to succeed, they wanted him to be the perfect symbol, the embodiment of Texas spirit, tough, steadfast, never backing down. They wanted him to carry the pride of this land on his shoulders, and Nolan, though he never said it, understood that better than anyone. But it was in that homecoming that his body entered a new war, quieter, more brutal and endless. The Astros jersey barely had time to fade before the pain started tormenting him every night, every practice, every game. Pitch counts grew excessive. Every windup stretched his shoulder tendons to the brink. Every follow-through tore his elbow from the inside. Some days Nolan lost feeling in his fingertips. They went numb like frozen. He had to look down to confirm he was actually gripping the ball, because his hand no longer sent clear signals. His elbow swelled like it had been hammered hundreds of times, to the point doctors urged long-term rest. But Nolan just looked at them, nodded slightly, then took the field the next day. His shoulder burned like fire racing from neck to blade every time he turned. That feeling never left. It just waited for him to push more, throw more, then flared hotter, sharper. Many nights, his body hurt so much, he couldn't lie on his side. He had to sit propped against the wall, cradling his right arm, breathing in gasps like someone fleeing a fire. Ruth saw it all, but could do nothing but gently hold his hand and whisper, "Are you sure you can take this?" Nolan always said, "I'm fine." But the truth was he wasn't fine, never was. The pain followed him from the field to home like a shadow that wouldn't leave. But what made that pain even more horrific was the invisible pressure from home. Texans carried immense pride in baseball, and when Nolan returned, they believed this was Texas's moment for its own hero, a hero who never sighed, never refused the ball, never fell. They wanted Nolan to be the image of invincibility, and he, though no one ordered it, felt he had to carry that role, because Texas gave him his childhood, because Texas was where he met Ruth, because Texas had always left the door open for his return, because Texas needed him. He knew it, and he lived in fear of being seen as a quitter, so every game became a battlefield, every pitch a slash into his body. Every time he asked for an ice pack to reduce swelling, he felt weaker than Texas expected. And then night fell with hours of breath-stealing pain. Some nights he stayed awake, cold sweat down his spine, elbow pulsating like a second heart beating off rhythm. He'd stand, walk to the porch, breathe deep, try to find peace in the dark. But the pain wouldn't let him sleep, wouldn't let him forget, wouldn't let him be weak. He felt his 20s slipping away in every tremble of his arm, but he kept going. Because if not Nolan Ryan on the Astros mound, who would do it for Texas? And when he stepped onto the field on sweltering Houston evenings, stands packed, the crowd didn't know the man they cheered had nearly lost all feeling in his right arm. They didn't know that morning he could barely lift a glass of water. They didn't know that before the game, Nolan sat alone in the clubhouse, arm packed in ice, teeth clenched in pain, telling himself, "One more game. Texas needs me." That was the moment he was no longer an athlete. He was a warrior who knew he'd be crippled if he kept fighting, but still had to charge. And Texas, in the innocent purity of its love for Nolan, never saw that sacrifice. They only saw the 98 miles per hour fastball. They only saw the 300th strikeout of the season. They only saw an icon who never fell. But only Ruth and Nolan himself knew that baseball now wasn't just passion. It was the sweetest punishment of his life, a punishment he willingly accepted. And as the Astros started honoring him as one of the city's greatest heroes, Nolan smiled. But that smile, if you looked closely, was different. It carried gratitude, carried pride. but also the brutal truth that the price of becoming a hometown icon was his body would never be the same. And from the moment he stepped onto Minute Maid Park that year, his fate was sealed, a Texas man ready to sacrifice himself to keep the Texas flame burning, even knowing that flame would burn him to the very end. When the Astros chapter closed, everyone thought Nolan would slow down, rest, let his body, worn down after so many years, finally breathe. But no. At an age when most pitchers had retreated behind the curtain of memories, Nolan unexpectedly stepped into the most glorious final chapter of his life, the Texas Rangers. And it was also the cruelest chapter, where the dazzling light was ignited by the last remnants of his physical self. Arlington opened its arms to welcome Nolan like a king returning to his throne. Fans flooded the stadium, believing his presence was baseball's final gift to Texas. They thought he came to pass on experience, to mentor, to pose for the next generation. No one, not a single soul, imagined the man entering his 40s could still stand on the mound, let alone make history. But Nolan never lived by others' expectations. He lived by the vow he made as a boy in Alvin. If he could still throw, he would throw until tendons tore, until his last breath was gone. And then the unthinkable happened. In 1991, at age 44, Nolan Ryan threw the seventh no-hitter of his career. The stands exploded. People screamed until hoarse. People cried. People hugged like they'd witnessed a miracle from heaven, not just for the record, but because they knew they'd seen something almost supernatural, a man old enough to be the father of many players on the team, still throwing faster than the youngest in MLB. That night, Nolan walked off the field in the blinding glare of cameras, his eyes glowing with a pride few feel in a lifetime. But when he stepped through the clubhouse door, that light vanished as if it never existed. All that remained was a wrecked body, an elbow swollen like a ball, and an old man trembling in pain. People only saw the no-hitter night. They didn't see that afterward, Nolan had to ice for hours. Ice packs lined his right arm until his skin bruised purple. It felt like needles piercing every layer of flesh, but he gritted his teeth and endured. They didn't see the cortisone shots doctors had to inject into his elbow, long sharp needles plunging deep into the joint like a blade. Each injection, Nolan's eyes squeezed shut, hands gripping the chair until knuckles went white. For days after, his arm burned, hurting so much he couldn't lift a glass of water, but on game day, he still threw over 100 pitches like nothing happened. They didn't hear the steel-cold warning from the team doctor, Nolan, every pitch could be your last. If the tendon snaps at your age, you'll never move your right arm again. It wasn't a threat, it was truth. And Nolan knew, but as always, he just nodded, said softly, "I understand," then prepared for the next game. No one saw his endless sleepless nights. Every time he lay down, his shoulder felt yanked from its socket, his elbow pulsated, each throb a reminder his body no longer belonged to him. Some nights Ruth woke to find Nolan sitting at the foot of the bed, cradling his swollen red elbow, breathing in gasps. "Does it hurt?" she asked, voice worried. Nolan just forced a smile. "It's fine, I'm okay." But his body wasn't okay. It screamed for mercy every day. Every inch of his skin bore the marks of over 2 decades trampled by professional baseball. But what made this Rangers chapter sacred wasn't the pain. It was that he kept going. Because Nolan didn't take the field to prove anything to himself. He did it for Texas. For the kids wearing number 34 running around backyards in Houston. For the Dallas blue-collar workers grinding all week just to afford a ticket to watch him pitch. For the boys who once threw at walls like he did, hoping one day to stand where he stood. To Nolan, the Rangers weren't just his last team. It was where he repaid a spiritual debt to the land that made him. And it was with the Rangers that he lit the final spark of his fire, a light so beautiful it took your breath away, but paid for with pieces of his body burning away. Every time he stepped on the mound, the crowd roared like crashing waves, but they didn't know one errant pitch, one small snap could end his life. No one knew that to take the field each night, he wrestled his body for hours, like an old warrior forced into battle knowing he'd be crippled after. And no one knew the peaks they saw, the perfect games, The divine pitches were built from his fragments of pain, pain only Ruth and the doctors truly understood the cost of, but Nolan knew, and he still chose to step up, still chose to face the lights, still chose to fight. Because sometimes a man doesn't throw to win games, he throws to keep alive the soul that raised him, and for Nolan Ryan, that soul, that fire, never went out, it just burned halfway, and the more it burned, the brighter it blazed. The Rangers was where he proved a legend could hurt, could fall, could be torn by time, but never be conquered. And that was the epic tragedy of ages 40, 46, the years when all of America saw Nolan's light, but no one saw how much he had to burn to ignite that final flame. No chapter in Nolan Ryan's life was gentle, but perhaps the deepest, most smoldering, longest-lasting pain didn't come from swollen elbows or sleepless nights tormented by agony. It came from the one thing he couldn't win, despite conquering nearly every human limit, a World Series ring. It was the curse, the cut, the void never filled in the heart of a man who gave baseball everything but his life. For 27 years, a span like a lifetime, Nolan Ryan overcame every injury, every doubt, every dismissal. He created records humanity still doesn't know when will be broken. He became the symbol of Texas, of MLB, of unbreakable spirit, but in the end, when he looked back, one cold truth stood like a shadow that never let go. He never lifted the championship trophy, not once. When Nolan took the field, people feared his shadow, but when the season reached life or death, when the team needed a full system, when luck and collective power decided fate, Nolan was just one man, a man so great he defied logic, but still just one man. And baseball is cruel to great individuals. He could burn up a game with 10 strikeouts, but he couldn't carry a team to a title alone. He could create legend, but he couldn't write the ending, not just once, but many times. Nolan stood on the field, watching teammates cry, watching fans slump in disappointment, hearing opponents celebrate, hearing fireworks explode in the night, while his heart pounded like it would rip from his chest. Because he knew this year wasn't his either. The sharpest pain was watching others lift the trophy, right in front of him, men lesser than him, less talented, weaker, but they had the ring he never touched. He once whispered to a close teammate, on a night the Rangers lost the season, "I did everything a human can do, but some things aren't meant for you." That sentence was soft as breath, but held the sorrow of 3 decades. American media called Nolan the great man who doesn't need titles, but he knew that wasn't true. He wanted it, he craved it, he deserved it more than anyone. And America knew, MLB knew, the world knew, Nolan Ryan should have had a championship ring. A genius shouldn't have left the field without touching the ultimate peak. It's like Simon Cowell in television, topping every chart, dominating a culture, creating dozens of legends, but never winning an Oscar. And the pain wasn't in lacking the title, it was in the absurdity of fate. How can someone be that great and still be denied? That's the question Texas fans still ask, even now. A ring to them wasn't just a title. It was the universe's final acknowledgement of a man who gave his life to baseball, but the universe didn't give it to him. And Nolan had to learn to live with that void. When he retired, people asked if he had regrets. He smiled, a tired and quiet smile, and said, "I only regret one thing. I wanted to bring a championship to Texas for the people here." He didn't say for me. He never said I deserved it. He said for Texas, because that was the man he was putting his home before himself. But that didn't lighten the curse. Nolan entered old age with hundreds of records, but his heart still carried a void no one could touch. A void shaped like a championship ring. A void that when looked into showed his whole life, effort, pain, glory, and loss. Personal peaks could make him immortal, but never winning a championship turned his immortality into the most beautiful tragedy in American baseball history. Because some are so great, fate doesn't know how to reward them, so it denies them what they deserve most. And that was Nolan Ryan, the legend America owes a ring. After all the years defying biological limits, after seasons where he threw as if time couldn't touch him, Nolan Ryan's ending came in the cruelest way, not with fireworks, not with ovation, but with a knee-buckling collapse that silenced America. In 1993, At age 46, the Rangers entered the final games of the season. Fans knew they were witnessing a legend's last days, but no one, not even Nolan, knew fate was preparing a chilling finale. It was September 22nd, a day that seemed ordinary on the schedule, but became the deepest cut in Texas's heart. Nolan took the mound, still looking like the familiar old warrior, broad shoulders, ice-cold eyes, right arm carefully taped. The stadium held its breath with every wind-up. People no longer expected speed, they just wanted to see him stand there one more time. But time, the only enemy Nolan never beat, came to collect its debt. Just in the first inning, one routine pitch, a fastball inside, became a snap no one heard but everyone felt. His elbow tendon tore wide open, a real tear, not a strain, not minor pain, but a tear, a sharp crack like a thick branch snapping in the woods. And Nolan, the man who never knelt to any pain in 27 years, collapsed, not from weakness, but because his body was truly ripped in two. He braced himself on the ground, but his right elbow wouldn't respond. It hurt so much he couldn't feel his arm anymore. He tried to stand, tried to balance, tried to grasp the air, but couldn't. The man who stood firm under 50,000 screaming fans, who threw 150 pitches in a game without blinking, now couldn't fight his own body. And the moment Nolan went down, the entire stadium went dead silent. No shouts, no whispers, no creaking seats, just the absolute silence of 40,000 people witnessing something no one was prepared to see. Their legend felled by time. A few players ran to help, but Nolan stopped them. He wanted to stand on his own. He had to. That was his lifelong rule. But when he put weight on his right arm, his legs shook, his face twisted, not from pride, but from pain, like a knife from wrist to shoulder. He got up a little, then buckled again. And the crowd, who once cheered his 100 miles per hour heat, now watched him struggle to stand upright. It was a sight that made many cry for real. No one shouted his name anymore. No one cheered, because this wasn't a baseball moment. This was a human one. A human being crushed by his own greatness. It took minutes for Nolan to be helped off the field. Cameras zoomed on his face. No tears, no anger. Just the distant gaze of a man who just realized his body had said what he always refused to believe. It was time to stop. No fireworks, no planned farewell, no flowers, no speech, nothing. Just a torn elbow tendon, and the frozen silence of an entire state watching their hero unable to stand for the first time. It was exactly like the moment Simon Cowell's spine snapped in his bike accident, the moment the unbreakable finally broke. A brutal truth laid bare before the public. Legends are human too. But for Nolan, that cruel ending hurt more than Simon's accident in one way. It happened in front of the crowd, on the grass he loved most, in the role he spent a lifetime perfecting, and his body, the one that carried him through 7 no-hitters, thousands of strikeouts, decades of battle, chose this very place to let go. After that game, people asked if he wanted to try throwing again next season. Nolan just shook his head. No glamour, no trumpets, no retirement ceremony. A career of over 5,000 innings ended with a cold tear and an old man walking off in silence. But the most heartbreaking part wasn't that he couldn't throw anymore. It was that he tried to stand, and couldn't. That was the only moment in his career where his will didn't beat time. The only moment fans didn't want to see, but will never forget. Because sometimes a legend's ending isn't in the roar. It's in the silence that takes the world's breath away. And September 22nd, 1993, was that silence. But fate didn't stop at the 1993 collapse. It had another slash, deeper, crueler, and this time not aimed at his already ravaged arm, but straight at Nolan Ryan's heart. After retirement, people thought he'd finally rest, that after nearly 3 decades battling baseball, he could return to normal life, smile more with Ruth, watch his kids grow, enjoy middle age like any other man. But they forgot one thing. The years he defied his body didn't vanish when he stepped off the mound. They settled, then became a tangle of lead wires wrapped tight around his heart. In the late 1990s, Nolan started feeling short of breath walking the ranch. Just a few steps, he'd stop, hand on chest, gasping like the air was mocking him. Ruth saw it, but he always smiled. "It's nothing, just a little tired." But that fatigue wasn't normal, it was heavy, deep, smoldering. Like standing too long on the mound with a torn shoulder, but this time it was his heart, the one part he couldn't train, couldn't inject with cortisone, couldn't ice to stop the pain. In 2000, on a morning that seemed ordinary, tragedy struck like thunder. Nolan was about to leave the house when sudden dizziness slammed him down. Vision blacked out, chest clenched, like a giant hand squeezing from inside. He tried to breathe, but air stuck in his throat. Nolan, the man never floored by any pain, now lay sideways on the cold tile, trembling hand trying to grip the table edge, but unable to lift himself. Ruth ran from the kitchen, screaming, "Nolan, Nolan!" But he didn't answer, he just looked at her, eyes wide but glazed with fear, not the fear of a pitcher facing the league's strongest slugger, but the fear of a 53-year-old man thinking he was dying, breath fading, chest tightening in waves like hammers pounding, a burning spread from heart to left shoulder, a terrifying sign only those near death know. Ruth called 911. Nolan heard her choke on the address. He wanted to reassure her, say I'm okay, but his mouth made no sound. Ambulance arrived, rushing footsteps, paramedic radio chatter, straps buckling around him, all hazy, distant, like sounds in a long tunnel. Nolan was drifting toward the end of. On the way to the hospital, he felt the beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor, steady at first, then suddenly slowing, each beep a countdown. He heard a paramedic, blood pressure dropping, another prepare defibrillator if needed. And amid the chaos, Nolan's mind held one thing: Ruth, then the kids, then summer nights alone on the mound, lights blazing down, crowd roaring like waves. He thought of his whole life, and feared that moment was the final line. He whispered in his head, "Please don't let me go before I tell them I love them." But life gave him no time to say it. At the hospital, everything raced like fast-forward film. Blue-gowned doctors swarmed. Breathing tube, EKG, shouted, "We need to get him to surgery, heart's failing." And so Nolan Ryan, the legend who controlled every game he entered, was wheeled into the operating room with no control over a single second of his own fate. Doctors decided deep intervention. His heart was closing. Surgery dragged on. Oregon lights glaring on his pale face. Scalpel sliced chest. Blood. Sternum cracked open. His heart lay there, no longer powerful like when he threw 100 miles per hour fastballs, but exhausted, weak, trembling like a child about to let go. Every move a race with death. As they fought to save him, a nurse whispered, "That's Nolan Ryan, right?" The doctor replied, "In here, everyone's the same, all fighting to live." In the fog of anesthesia, Nolan heard machines blare when his heart slowed. Beep, beep, then a long pause tensing the room. That was the moment the rest of his life hung by a thread. After hours, surgery succeeded. But the brutal truth, the worst pain hadn't started. Post-op recovery was hell. Nolan woke feeling like 1,000 fastballs slammed his chest at once. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe deep. Every breath like a knife inside, and almost no sleep. Doctors told him, "This hurts more than a torn pitching muscle." Nolan just smiled weakly. They didn't get it. This wasn't just physical pain. It was the pain of an undefeated man, facing the truth. He was old, weakened, no longer himself. Ruth stayed by him every night. She held his hand, the one once the strongest throwing arm in the world, now too weak to grip hers firmly. He apologized in a raspy voice. "I thought I had more time. I was wrong." Once he cried, something he never did in his career in front of anyone. "I thought I was stronger than this, Ruth." Ruth placed her hand on his chest, over the long scar like a slash, and said, "I don't need you strong, I just need you alive." Those words made Nolan understand something the field never taught. Some battles can't be won by will. Some battles you survive, not to prove anything, but to not abandon those you love. The 2000 surgery was Simon Cowell's bike accident, but heavier, realer, more primal. It split Nolan's life in two, before and after the day he saw death sit beside him. And baseball, it was still there, but fainter, like a beautiful memory of a man trying to hold the last warmth of youth. Nolan survived, but he was never the same again, because once you see death one heartbeat away, the rest of life becomes a fragile gift. And from that moment, he knew the most precious thing wasn't strikeouts, no-hitters, records. It was mornings opening his eyes to Ruth beside him, afternoons hearing his son call Dad, life simple, but something he almost lost forever. Surviving the 2000 heart surgery, you'd think Nolan Ryan would leave professional baseball, choose the peace doctors, family, and age all begged for. But baseball wouldn't let him go, and he wouldn't let baseball go. Like a soldier who lived in trenches, when the guns stopped, he didn't know what to do with his hands. Baseball was blood, breath, soul. And so, as soon as his body recovered enough to walk the Texas ranch, MLB pulled him back, not to the mound, but into closed rooms where suited power brokers decided a team's fate. The Rangers, his final playing team, called him back with a title the media applauded, President of the Texas Rangers. To fans, it was a fairy tale ending, the legend returning to lead the team where he threw his last pitches. But behind the praising articles, camera smiles, grand press conferences, was a darkness Nolan was never prepared for. Because in the world of owners and executives, where strength isn't measured in empire but in influence, money, and connections, an athlete's glory holds little value. Nolan entered meetings with his familiar humility and sincerity, but he soon realized the looks weren't like fans gazing at a hero. They were colder, calculating. They saw him not as Texas's worshipped icon, but as an old ex-player who doesn't know business. Whispers behind his back grew. Does he understand finance? Legends just PR. Fame doesn't run a team. Nolan thought he'd be respected, but he got doubt. Every meeting, every plan, every proposal scrutinized with suspicion. He wanted to build a strong, honest Rangers culture, based on discipline and Texas spirit. But to management, his words sounded like an old man's dreams of the past, and so the power struggle began. Board members quietly allied to strip his authority, shrink his voice in key decisions. His name was on the org chart, but his say dwindled meeting by meeting. In glossy rooms smelling of expensive cologne, Nolan learned a brutal truth. In modern MLB, power isn't in 5,714 strikeouts, it's in the hands of suits who never stepped on the field. More heartbreaking, the team he loved most, where he threw his final pitches with a rotting body, was the first to chip away his credibility. Some nights, Ruth found him alone in the living room, files spread out, eyes staring through the wall. "They don't want you leading," she asked softly. Nolan just exhaled, long and heavy. "I think they don't trust me." That pain didn't stab his elbow or heart, it stabbed his pride. After months of silent fighting, he knew he couldn't stay where his voice had no place. And so Nolan left the Rangers, quietly, no noise, no arguments. The door closed cruelly on the man who helped launch the team into a new era, but life gave him little time to hurt, because soon after, the Astros, his Houston hometown team, where he fought with his whole body, invited him back as executive advisor. A chance to reclaim trust, a new chapter, belated recognition, everyone thought so. The Astros were building an empire, and who better than Nolan Ryan as spiritual guide for a title-hungry team? But soon he realized his role was just a living trophy. They respected his name, but not his input. They put him in promo photos, but not in real strategy meetings. Nolan walked Astros office halls daily, files in hand, but no one truly needed him. One day he met leadership, proposed a long-term vision. When he finished, the room went silent, as if he never spoke. A board member glanced past him and moved on. "Next, let's talk budget." That look, that dismissal, cut deeper than any 100 miles per hour pitch that tore his tendons. He began to understand he wasn't invited to lead. He was a living statue for the team to display, a Texas icon used as glossy paint for the franchise image. And then, like with the Rangers, silence became their way of showing him out. No press conference, no official statement, no thanks, just a small note: Nolan Ryan leaves Astros. A legend erased from the empire he helped build, not by failure, but by backstage suits, who never threw a pitch in their lives. A man who made MLB bow, pushed out the door with ruthless quiet. In that moment, Nolan understood one of his life's greatest tragedies. On the field, he was immortal. Behind the scenes he was just a replaceable number. The suits, who never knew the pain of throwing until tendons snapped, wore him down slowly, not with hammers, with belittling, not with insults, with ignoring, not with physical pain, with the invisible cruelty of power, and once again, he left in silence, just like ending his career in 1993, twice pushed out of the two teams tied to his name, twice walking away with no applause behind. A legend swallowed by MLB's own machinery, not because he failed, but because he was too genuine, in a world with no room for that genuineness. And in his later years, Nolan absorbed the brutal truth: it's not just time that topples the great, sometimes people do it too. After leaving MLB in silence, after silent battles with cold-suited men behind the curtain, Nolan Ryan entered his 70s, like a soldier returning from a half-century battlefield. No crowds, no blazing stadiums, no more echoes of his name across Texas, only an aging body, and the devastation time, baseball, and life had left behind. In his early 70s, Nolan began to realize what he'd ignored his whole life: his body was no longer an ally. His eyes dimmed, not the blur of normal old age, but like a lens scratched by thousands of stadium lights that had glared into him for 27 years. Reading a book, he'd hold the page far, then near, then far again, but the words still smeared like unshed tears. Some mornings he'd look in the mirror at his face, but couldn't see the lines clearly anymore. That scared him. Not fear of aging, but fear that one day, his grandchild's face in front of him would be just a pale blur. That fear cut deeper than any tendon-tearing pitch. Then his back, the pillar that balanced all his power for years, started aching like someone twisting steel wire inside. Each morning, he'd brace both hands on the bed frame, inhale deep like stepping to the mound for the first inning, trying to stand without groaning. Every step down the ranch's wooden hallway was a negotiation with pain. Heels hurt, ankles stiff, calves tight, knees like nailed shut. In youth, a few steps were nothing. Now a few steps were a mountain climb. And sleep, the one escape from pain, abandoned him too. He couldn't sleep deeply anymore. Side lying hurt his shoulder, back lying hurt his spine. Every turn sent electric jolts through his elbow. Some nights he'd bolt up at 2 a.m., gasping, forehead soaked in sweat. Not nightmares, but old pain, the pain of thousands of pitches, returning like ghosts. At 70, people think of vacations, trips, quiet afternoons reading. Not Nolan. Every morning began as a battle, not to beat someone, but to keep existing in a body cracking day by day. He'd step onto the porch, where Texas sun filtered through trees. Wind blew slow, scene peaceful, but the peace didn't touch him. He'd sit in the old wooden chair, hands on knees, inhale deep, exhale slow, and sometimes no one knew. He'd close his eyes and whisper, "Today, please give me strength to see the faces I love." No one heard that prayer, but it existed, heavy as old age pressing his shoulders. Afternoons, he sat alone on the porch, staring at familiar golden fields. No crowd noise, no ball smacking mitt, just wind and his own memories, memories both proud and heart-stabbing. He remembered poor Alvin childhood, freezing newspaper mornings, scouts dismissing him, Angels, where he first blazed, and first pains kept him awake, Astros, months wrestling body and hometown pride, Rangers, where final no-hitters lit brightest light, then drowned him in bone-deep agony. The day his elbow tore, collapsing before 40,000, the 2,000 heart surgery, hearing the countdown in beeps, and so memories flooded, mixed like slow-motion film, only he watched, beautiful and suffocating, in pain, and in nights too quiet, quiet that swallowed the whole Texas ranch. Loneliness crept like cold water, a loneliness no spotlight, no game, no crowd could chase, loneliness from a truth he never dared voice. Though all America knows his name, this pain, only he bears. The world saw him as legend, but they weren't there when he leaned on the fridge at 5 a.m., unable to breathe deep. They didn't see his hands shake tying shoes. They didn't know it took 15 minutes to rise from the sofa. They didn't hear his gasps when old chest pain stabbed again. They didn't know at 70, his greatest fear wasn't death, but living without clearly seeing his grandkids' faces. That fear choked him more than any fastball compressed in his chest. And every night, After Ruth slept, he'd go to the porch where Texas darkness stretched like a morning veil. He'd sit alone, no words, no complaints, just living with what he'd always endured alone. His 70s weren't gentle sunsets, they were slow living, slow hurting, slow remembering. A man who threw 100 miles per hour, now needing half a minute to straighten his back. A man who made millions roar, now sitting alone under a Texas sky still as death. A man who feared nothing on earth, now fearing loss of the one irreplaceable thing, the faces he loved. And that was the cruelest loneliness, not from being alone, but because some battles in life, only the body's bearer knows how deep they cut. This was the chapter Nolan Ryan never spoke, but it was the truest, rawest, most tragic of his old age. The chapter where the legend faced the truth, that even the strongest have pains no one can share. And on Texas wind nights brushing the porch, if you listened close, you could hear Nolan whisper to himself, "I'm still alive, but why do I feel so empty?" Amid the pains of 70, amid nights alone on the Texas porch, Nolan Ryan gradually understood that if anything kept him standing through a shattered life, it was family, the quiet people behind the spotlight the world only saw from one side. And among them, the one who carried most, endured most, sacrificed most, was always Ruth. She aged with every crack in his body, silver hair trembling hands with years, but eyes still holding the patience that walked with him since they were Texas kids learning to stand in life. Each morning, when Nolan stirred from back or bone pain, Ruth quietly rose first, prepared meds, placed a hand on his shoulder like steadying a partner about to fall. No blame, no demands, but in those silver strands were decades of loneliness. Countless times she watched him leave with a duffel, leaving her to face life alone. That love wasn't loud, flowery, promised. It was carved in every night she waited, worried his elbow hurt too much to sleep. Carved in every afternoon she watched him shuffle to the porch, heart-twisting knowing each step cut into his heroic past. And beside Ruth, their 3 children grew in the endless shadow of a legend, beautiful enough for the world to admire, heavy enough to crush kids who never lived normally. Reed, his son, was most affected. The path Reed chose, baseball, then MLB executive, wasn't just passion but continuing his father's legacy. But following a legend sometimes steals the follower's freedom. Everywhere Reed went, people didn't see him, they saw Nolan Ryan's son. No one asked what he wanted. No one asked if he felt pressure. No one asked if he feared failure, but everyone compared. Everyone expected. Everyone wondered if he could live under light too bright from the name he carried. As a young man, Reed told friends, "I don't know if I'm living my life or living to answer my dad's shadow," and that hurt him in ways no one saw, because he never dared tell his father, fearing one sigh would haunt Nolan into old age. Then Reed entered MLB management, and like his father, he was worn down by cold suits, doubts, power plays, whispers. What does he have besides Nolan's name? All made Reed understand his father in a depth outsiders never felt. And when Reed was fired from the Astros, his first thought wasn't his career, but whether his dad would be sad. He failed. That was the legend's endless shadow of expectation, of absence, of a name so big it eclipsed his children's breath. And the 2 daughters, Reese and Wendy, each carrying a piece of his heart, grew with their father's gentle but persistent absence. Birthdays he missed, performances he watched on VHS, childhood moments that should have had him beside them, but instead had mom's notes for him to see later. They didn't blame him, but they knew the cost of a legend father. Love always came after the MLB schedule, and now, as Nolan aged, they returned to him with love without resentment, but in their eyes lingered quiet sadness, the sadness of children who loved their dad so much, they never dared say they once wished he'd shown up more. And Ruth, the woman who lived her life in the darkness behind her husband's lights, still stood beside him like a small lamp shielding the home from old age storms. Some afternoons she brewed tea, set it down, then watched Nolan hunch into the kitchen, heart aching with love and pain. She saw the world's once strongest man, the man America held its breath for with every pitch, now trembling to hold a teacup. And in that moment, her love for him was deeper than any vow, a love of endurance, a love of understanding, a love of decades missing but never leaving. But that same family endured fears no fan ever saw. They lived with daily dread. What if he has another heart attack today? What if he can't get up tomorrow? What if his vision goes completely? They loved him, but they feared losing him, and in that love was lasting pain, the pain of loving a man who gave his life to baseball, until his body was just limping fragments. Nolan often sat silent long, looking at Ruth and the kids, wanting to say something but unable, because he knew his decades of silence made them live in too much worry, and so he carried nameless guilt, not for choosing baseball, but because baseball took from them more than anyone ever knew. At 70 he understood his legend was built by three quiet people, Ruth, Reed and the girl's mother. They were the legs keeping him upright. They were the roof shielding him from loneliness. They were the only place Nolan wasn't pressure, expectation, legend, but just the man they loved. But their tragedy was his too. They loved him so much they accepted living in his life's shadow, a shadow beautiful but full of wounds. And now, lights out, stands silent, endless baseball season forever over. That family stayed beside him, but his remorse for them lingered, like an unbroken thread in the heart of a man once immortal but always missing them in too many summers. And it was precisely when old age began stripping away his steps, his inches of vision, his breaths no longer full, that Nolan Ryan understood more clearly than ever that a person's true legacy lies not in numbers etched on record boards, but in the hearts his life touched, the people he inspired, uplifted, guided, even as his own body slowly dimmed. In his final working years, Nolan devoted time to the Nolan Ryan Foundation, an organization born from his purest wish to give opportunities to poor kids, Texas students without means to chase their dreams. At an age when he should have been resting in the porch shade, sipping tea while Texas wind brushed his silver hair, he spent mornings joining school workshops, afternoons meeting struggling poor families, evenings reviewing rural kids' scholarship plans. No one knew that to reach each charity event, he spent mornings just convincing his body to rise. No one knew that before every speech, he sat breathing slow, hands trembling slightly from back pain, from chest spasms never fully gone since the 2000 surgery, but he still showed up, still stepped to the podium, still smiled at the kids in the front row, kids like the Alvin boy he once was, poor, quiet, dismissed. Once a boy stood and asked, "Sir, were you scared? What if you failed?" Nolan paused a few seconds, then spoke in a hoarse but warm voice, "I never wanted to be the best, I just wanted to be the one who never quit." The room fell silent, because in those eyes dimmed by age, the gaze no longer piercing like when he threw 100 miles, still burned the fire that once bowed America, a will that never died. He knew his body was fading, knew standing long meant stabbing back pain, knew talking much tightened his chest, knew every evening he'd rub knees, shoulders, elbow like a man who lived too long in pain's world. But he also knew young Texas needed him, needed his story, needed the truth that you don't have to be born privileged to become legend, needed to learn rising when the world doubts. So despite age, despite a wrecked body, Nolan kept going, kept teaching kids to love baseball, love themselves, not run from hardship. He did charity, auctioned personal items for funds, signed free for poor kids, launched mentoring for troubled teens. Some days, Ruth gripped his hand tight before he took the stage, whispering, "Are you sure you can handle it?" Nolan just smiled, the smile only Ruth ever understood, because to him, every stage step to help a child was a final inning. He still had strength to pitch. People think Nolan Ryan's legacy is 7 no-hitters, 5,714 strikeouts, 27 blazing years. But those he met, helped, heard speak, know the real legacy isn't in pitches, it's in hearts inspired to rise from pain, boys who thought they weren't good enough, poor girls who never believed in college, young men pushed to dark corners, but shown light by a man who walked out of his own darkness. To them, Nolan Ryan isn't just a baseball legend, he's living proof a person can break however many times fate wants, but still stand, still throw, still live, still give. And in his late 70s, when his body hurt more than it breathed, when his eyes dimmed but his spirit shone, Nolan knew he was no longer racing time, he was passing the flame, keeping it alive for others, even as his own body smoldered. That's the legacy no trophy, no record can touch. That legacy is the man he became. A legend not for fastballs, but for the heart that lit darkness for generations after him. And then, when the story reached its final chapter, Nolan Ryan sat alone in the empty Texas ballpark stands, where he once made tens of thousands rise before every pitch. The sun sank slow beyond the horizon, crimson sunset spreading over the grass like a fiery carpet. No more cheers, no players, no ball-smacking mitt, just a 78-year-old man quietly gazing at the mound where he threw away his youth, strength, soul. His shoulders now hunched, left hand clutching his knee, right hand trembling lightly, fingers curling as if trying to recall holding a ball, a feeling his body could no longer bear. And in that blood-red sunset, the narrator's voice rang out, deep and heartfelt, speaking what he never voiced. A legend pays with his own body. It's true to the point of heartbreak. His body tore, broke, went numb, lost sleep thousands of nights, just because he dared throw harder, farther, longer than anyone in his era. Torn tendons, burning shoulders, heart nearly stopping, fading vision, all the price of greatness the world once applauded. Then the voice continued, soft but sharp as a blade. A father pays with time lost with his kids. How many birthdays missed? How many times did his son ask Mom, is Dad coming? How many family moments left an empty dinner chair? The years America called his name were the years his kids learned to grow without him beside them. And next, a Texas man pays with nights no one sees. Nights wrestling elbow pain that stole his breath. Nights on the porch clutching his chest, fearing heart pain's return. Nights watching house lights fade, knowing everyone slept, and he alone held the remnants of his soul in darkness. But in those unseen nights, Nolan Ryan showed his truest self, resilient, enduring, never retreating. A real Texas man, not for 100 miles per hour heat, but for standing firm even when his body betrayed him, even when loneliness and pain tried to fell him. And that is the American spirit. Not winning, not titles, but rising after falling, continuing though exhausted, loving though lost. As the Texas sun dipped behind the last seats, Nolan looked to the sky, eyes dim but sparkling with a lifetime of defiance. He knew time would dust his records. Old pitches would live only in stat books. Today's kids might never see him pitch. But what he left, the true legacy, lives not in records, not in stats, but in America's heart, in the hearts of boys once dismissed, in the hearts of youth who refused to quit despite hurt, in the hearts of people who believe perseverance is the strongest thing humans possess. And that's why, as the last sunset light vanished, the narrator closed with tribute to the man who spent his life teaching America to stand. Legends will fade, but what he left in America's heart will never vanish. If this story touched you, hit subscribe, so we can keep bringing you tales of great people, not just for wins, but for what they sacrificed to stand until the end. Leave a comment to honor Nolan Ryan, the man who threw with his heart and lived beyond legend. Looking back at Nolan Ryan's journey in this story, it's hard not to feel a smoldering sadness mixed with deep respect. From the Alvin kid waking at 3-4 a.m. to deliver papers with his dad in freezing Texas, coming home to throw at a brick wall until his hands bled, we see a very real America, poor, quiet but enduring. That childhood dismissal, scouts noting, he throws but doesn't know how to pitch, forged a man carrying the complex, never good enough, a feeling many American workers know in the cutthroat grind. Nolan's tragedy isn't just a ravaged body, burning shoulders, swollen elbows, no hitter at 44, then tearing his elbow, collapsing in 1993, 2000 heart attack with the monitor beeping like a countdown. But the invisible costs, missed kids' birthdays, graduations watched on tape, Ruth quietly driving, parent-teacher meetings, raising the house while he became a TV legend. All America knew Ryan Express, but the nights he gasped clutching his chest on the porch, or Reed crushed under his father's shadow, only family saw. At 78, fearing one day not seeing his grandkids clearly, still fundraising for the Nolan Ryan Foundation, helping poor Texas kids. We understand true legacy isn't 5,714 strikeouts, but using his dying flame to keep fire for the next generation. The final image, him alone in empty stands under blazing Texas sunset, is a reminder to Americans, every glory has a price. The lesson isn't blind win worship, but valuing quiet sacrificers, balancing dreams and family, and learning from Nolan a simple yet profound truth. You may never get the rewards you deserve, but you can always choose to stand firm, kind, and pass good to those after. If Nolan Ryan's painful yet proud journey touched your heart, hit subscribe to keep joining us in stories of America's great people. Thank you for staying to the end. See you in the next video, where we continue honoring legends who live by strength, kindness, and unbreakable perseverance.